Karoline Leavitt walked into the dealership like any other customer. She wasn't there for politics. She wasn't there to make a statement. She was simply a woman, a wife, doing what many of us do, handling life's errands. But for the man behind the desk, that wasn't enough. He saw her and didn't see a customer. He didn't see a human being. He saw a target. He saw an opportunity to sneer, to smirk, to flex his ideological superiority. That's the world we're in now, where everyday interactions are polluted by partisan filters, where people can't hold back their contempt even in the most basic human exchanges. This manager, emboldened by the echo chamber he lives in, decided to mock her. Not because she said anything, not because she caused a scene, but because of who she was, because of what she stood for, because her name rang a bell. That was enough for him to make it personal. He threw a jab, maybe passive-aggressive, maybe overt, maybe a smirk, maybe a snide comment about politics, about media, about those people. Either way, he made it clear. She wasn't welcome. His pride inflated like a balloon with every syllable. He thought he'd scored a win. He thought he'd struck a blow for the team. After all, isn't that what it's about now for them? Humiliate the enemy. Score points. Feel good about it. Post about it later, maybe. But here's the part he didn't know. This wasn't just some random person he was insulting. This wasn't just another moment where he could toss his ideological darts and strut off feeling victorious. There was a whole other layer to this situation, one he was too arrogant to consider. Because while he was busy playing his little game, reality was preparing a twist. The very next day, the balance shifted, the hierarchy restructured, and without warning, the man who mocked her found himself face to face with the one person he couldn't afford to underestimate, her husband. Not in a parking lot, not online, but in the boardroom, at the top of the chain, the new boss, the man signing his checks, the man who now had every right to hold him accountable. That's the moment everything flipped. All the smugness, gone. The arrogance, evaporated. Because suddenly, this wasn't a game anymore. This was real life. This was livelihood. And the person he mocked, the one he thought he'd humiliated, was now directly connected to the very authority he had to answer to. That's not just a twist of fate. That's instant accountability. That's poetic justice in its purest form. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about exposure. The mask slipped. The character revealed itself. And the consequences weren't theoretical. They were immediate. He got a front row seat to the reality that arrogance doesn't protect you, that mocking someone because of their beliefs isn't just unethical, it's short-sighted. Because you never know who people are. You never know the full story. You never know what tomorrow holds. And this wasn't some Hollywood drama. This was real. It played out in a place we all recognize, an office, a dealership, a workplace, and it showed how quickly power can change hands, how fast perception can collapse. One day, you're the one scoffing at the customer. The next, you're reporting to their family. That's not just ironic, it's a warning. This moment stripped away all the pretenses. It revealed the fragility of those who base their confidence on power imbalances and ideological bubbles. It proved that dignity doesn't come from grandstanding and respect can't be faked. And when you dismiss someone based on assumptions, when you choose mockery over civility, you set yourself up to be humbled in the most direct, unforgettable way. Because truth has a funny way of crashing the party. It walks in uninvited and rearranges the whole dynamic. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't knock. It just shows up. And when it does, the ones who thought they were in control suddenly realize they never were. It's a pattern that repeats itself over and over again. Time and again, those on the left assume that anyone who doesn't think like them must be stupid, unimportant, or irrelevant. They assume they hold all the power, culturally, socially, and economically. They've become so used to dominating the conversation that they've convinced themselves their perspective is the only one that matters. So when someone walks in the door who doesn't share their worldview, they don't see a person. They see a threat. Or worse, they see a joke. That's what happened in this situation. A woman walks into a dealership. She's known in certain circles. Her name carries weight. but not in the spaces these people control. And that's exactly why they felt free to mock her. It wasn't about her behavior, her attitude, or anything she did in that moment. It was about what she represented. In their minds, she didn't belong. She was the other, an outsider. And because she didn't conform to their narrative, they thought it was open season. This is what happens when people live inside an ideological bubble. They get so comfortable surrounded by people who agree with them that they forget how to interact with those who don't. They start to believe their opinions are facts, that their way is the only way, and that anyone who disagrees must be either evil or ignorant. That kind of thinking isn't just dangerous, it's delusional. It blinds people to reality. It makes them underestimate those outside their tribe. And most of all, it makes them sloppy. They didn't do their homework. They didn't stop to consider who they were dealing with. They saw someone they disagreed with and assumed they were punching down. That arrogance was their biggest mistake. They forgot that influence comes in many forms. Not all power is loud. Not all strength announces itself. Sometimes the most powerful people are the quietest in the room. And in this case, they were about to learn that lesson the hard way. There's a deep irony in how the tables turned. The very people who mocked her one day had to answer to her circle the next. That wasn't just a coincidence. That was a wake-up call. It was a reminder that you can't judge someone's significance by your limited perspective. Just because someone doesn't broadcast their power doesn't mean they don't have it. And just because someone holds different beliefs doesn't mean they don't belong in the room. The left has spent years building institutions that echo their values. Entertainment, media, academia, they dominate those arenas. But they've mistaken that dominance for permanence. They believe the pendulum will never swing back. They believe their grip on culture is unshakable. And that belief has made them careless. They don't see the silent wave building beneath them. They don't recognize the growing strength of people who've been written off, ignored, and underestimated. This event, though small on the surface, is a reflection of a much bigger shift. It's a sign that things aren't as one-sided as they appear. That there's more to the story than the narrative being pushed from the top down. The woman they mocked was supposed to be powerless in their world. But when power shifted in the very environment where they thought they ruled, it exposed just how fragile their control really was. It's not about politics, it's about respect. It's about human dignity. When you dismiss people because they think differently, you're not just being rude, you're revealing your own weakness. Because strength doesn't need to belittle. Real confidence doesn't need to mock. And those who are truly secure in their beliefs don't feel threatened by the presence of someone who disagrees. Underestimating people based on ideology is one of the biggest mistakes anyone can make, especially now. The world is changing. Power is decentralizing. Influence doesn't look the way it used to. And those who still think they're on top, untouchable, unchallenged, are in for a shock. This incident was just a glimpse of that reality. A glimpse of what happens when the underestimated start to rise. When those who've been mocked, sidelined, and dismissed finally have their moment and prove they were never out of the game, just out of sight. We live in a time when identity politics has become the measuring stick for everything, from hiring decisions to social interactions, from who gets praised to who gets punished. It's a system built not on merit, not on character, but on labels. Labels assigned and weaponized to sort people into neat little boxes, victim or villain, ally or enemy. And in this system, the narrative isn't just loud, it's controlling. It dictates who deserves empathy and who deserves ridicule, who should be celebrated and who should be silenced. That's exactly what played out when this woman walked into the dealership. She didn't walk in demanding attention. She didn't flaunt her beliefs or pick a fight. But her name, her identity as someone on the wrong side of the political spectrum, was enough. Enough to trigger disdain. Enough to mark her as the other. And that was all it took for the mocking to begin. Because in the world of identity politics, facts don't matter. Actions don't matter. Only your perceived affiliations do. This is the twisted logic of the ideology. If you're aligned with certain values, you're automatically seen as backward, hateful, or out of touch. No context, no curiosity, No attempt to understand the person in front of you. Just instant judgment, followed by a moral high ground that's been artificially constructed by echo chambers and virtue signaling. It wasn't about what she said, or did, it was about who she was in their eyes. And because she didn't fit their preferred categories, she was fair game. That's the fatal flaw in identity politics. It assumes too much and understands too little. It divides instead of connects. It teaches people to judge others not as individuals, but as symbols of a tribe they've been conditioned to hate. It replaces personal interaction with snap judgments based on race, gender, politics, class. And when people live in that mindset long enough, they lose the ability to see humanity in those they disagree with. The dealership manager didn't see a customer. He didn't see a fellow American. He saw a symbol, a caricature, someone to be mocked. Because she had the audacity to believe something different. That's not progress. That's not tolerance. That's not the enlightened worldview they claim to champion. That's tribalism, pure and simple. The same kind of tribalism that fuels every form of discrimination, just repackaged in modern language and dressed up as virtue. And it's not just hypocrisy, it's deeply unstable. Because eventually the logic collapses. Eventually it backfires. And that's what happened here. One moment she's being laughed at because of her political identity. The next, the tables turn, and those who laughed are suddenly faced with consequences. Not because she sought revenge, not because she raised her voice, but because life has a way of exposing falsehoods, of revealing who really holds power and who was merely pretending. When identity politics backfires, it's not just embarrassing, it's instructive. It shows how shallow and brittle the whole system really is. It shows that labeling people isn't a substitute for understanding them. That judging someone based on which side they're on can lead to blind spots so massive, they end up undermining your own position. People like the dealership staff assume they're on the right side of history. They think their values give them a moral pass to ridicule those who don't agree. But what happens when reality confronts that assumption? What happens when the person you dismissed turns out to be someone you have to respect, because of position, because of merit, or simply because they showed more grace than you ever did? That's when the facade breaks. That's when the ideology reveals itself not as a source of strength, but as a cage. Because the moment you can't treat someone with basic respect, just because they vote differently or speak differently, you've lost more than the argument. You've lost your grip on decency. And when that becomes normal, when people feel empowered to mock others based solely on political affiliation, you know the system is rotting from the inside. This wasn't just a personal insult. It was a snapshot of a deeper societal sickness, one where ideology overrides empathy, where judgment replaces dialogue. But in this case, the script flipped. And in that reversal, we're reminded of a truth that identity politics tries to bury. People are more than the labels assigned to them. They are complex, worthy of respect, and often far more powerful than the assumptions made about them. One of the most revealing truths in life is how quickly control can shift. One day someone feels untouchable, comfortable in their position, confident in their place, certain of their standing. They speak and act with that assumption firmly. Lodged in their mind, I'm the one in charge here. But what they often forget is that the world moves fast. Status is not permanent. Power is not guaranteed. And when people act like the current structure is set in stone, they set themselves up for the shock of their lives. That's exactly what unfolded when a woman, targeted with mockery for her views, quietly endured a moment of disrespect from someone who assumed he held all the leverage. There was no sign, no warning, no clue that anything would change. He thought he knew where he stood and who she was. Someone beneath him, someone insignificant, someone who could be belittled without consequence. The smirk, the side comment, the ego on full display, it all came from a place of false security. But the next day, everything changed. The environment shifted, the structure realigned, and suddenly, the very person he had written off was connected to someone at the top of the ladder. That connection didn't arrive with fanfare or a speech. It simply stepped into place, and the entire dynamic flipped in an instant. In one moment, his role went from authority to accountability. He found himself under the very gaze he had dismissed the day before. That's how fast life can turn. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about personal retaliation. It was about reality. The reality that roles are not static. The idea that we can treat people however we want because we think we're above them is a dangerous delusion, because tomorrow isn't promised. Power structures are fluid. And the person you're mocking today might be the one reviewing your performance, influencing your future, or holding your fate in their hands tomorrow. Too many people operate from a place of assumed dominance. They believe that because they're in a position of control at the moment, they can let their biases dictate their behavior. They let ideology blind them to the fact that people are more than the snapshot they've created in their minds. And because they can't see beyond their immediate sense of superiority, they act without caution, without consideration, without humility. But when the tables turn, as they often do, it's a brutal wake-up call. That's when the facade crumbles. That's when the so-called authority figures realize they were only ever borrowing that control. Because true leadership, true stability, isn't about being the loudest or the one with the final say today. It's about consistency, integrity, and respect, traits that don't change depending on who's in front of you. This situation served as a reminder of something we should never forget. How we treat people when we think we don't need them says everything about us. It reveals our character or lack thereof. And if we act with cruelty or mockery just because we assume we'll never face consequences, then we've built our entire worldview on a house of cards. The shift in power that took place wasn't dramatic in appearance, but its impact was profound. Suddenly, the person who had dismissed another as irrelevant had to sit with the knowledge that his assumptions cost him his dignity. Not because someone lashed out, but because someone else walked in the room and made his position look much smaller than he thought it was. It's a lesson that applies far beyond one dealership or one workplace. In every interaction, we're writing a story about who we are. Every gesture, every word, every glance, it either builds respect or burns it down. And the ones who get burned the worst are the ones who forget that tables don't just turn. They spin. Quickly. Quietly. Without warning. So when someone acts as though their place at the top is permanent, when they mock, belittle, or dismiss someone who quietly walks through the door, they're playing a dangerous game. Because the next door that opens might not be one they expect, and when it does, they'll have to face the weight of their own arrogance, in silence, under new management. In the end, this story is not just about a dealership. It's not just about one person being mocked and another person walking in with unexpected authority. It's about a larger truth, a truth that plays out in offices, schools, airports, coffee shops, and online comment sections every single day. The way we treat people matters. The way we assume, judge, and act when we think no one's watching says more about our character than any resume or title ever could. And when the assumptions are wrong, when the mask of superiority slips, the consequences are often swift and undeniable. We live in a society that talks constantly about fairness, about equity, about tolerance. And yet, when those values are put to the test in real, everyday encounters, many people fail to live up to them. They preach inclusion while practicing exclusion. They talk about empathy while sneering at those who don't echo their beliefs. They use their positions to mock rather than to uplift, assuming that their grip on the present gives them ownership of the future. But the world doesn't work like that. Not anymore. What this moment illustrates is the power of restraint, the strength in humility, and the sharp edge of underestimation. The woman in the story didn't lash out. She didn't argue or fight back. She simply endured, and life did the rest. The roles reversed, the balance shifted, and what was hidden came to light. That's not luck or coincidence. That's cause and effect. That's the result of someone being rooted enough in themselves to know they didn't need to clap back. They just needed to let time reveal the truth. Respect should never be transactional. It shouldn't depend on someone's job title, political stance, or perceived social rank. The person bagging groceries deserves the same decency as the CEO. The quiet woman walking into a showroom deserves the same courtesy as the loudest customer in the room. Because today's nobody might be tomorrow's decision maker. And even if they're not, they're still a person, still deserving of basic human decency. That's not politics, that's principle. Let this be a reminder. Never get too comfortable standing on someone else's back. Never assume that your place above someone today guarantees that same view tomorrow. The people you dismiss might be the ones you depend on next. The ones you mock might become the ones writing your evaluations. And when that moment comes, it won't be about revenge. It will be about exposure. In a world obsessed with optics, with power plays, with who's trending and who's canceled, real power still lies in how you treat people when you have nothing to gain. That's the kind of integrity that endures. That's the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. And as this story shows, it's the quiet ones, those underestimated and overlooked, who often end up holding the keys when the door finally swings open.